Hi everybody, it's Martin from the Washboard Resonators. On this week's video, it's a complete guide to resonator guitar strings. So what are we going to do and how are we going to do it? Well, one of the first things is I have 4 very distinctly different kinds of strings here. I'm going to restring this guitar 4 times and then record the results. I'm going to do it blindly. And I'd like you guys and gals to tell us which strings you think sound the best. So straight away we're going to compare Monel, Nickel, Phosphor Bronze, round core, hexagonal core. They will all make a difference. I'm fascinated to find out. Then what we'll do at the end is I've got lots to share with you about these kind of materials, but also the gauges, how they affect the sound and different playing types, bottlenecks, standard tuning. You know, how the brands are different, the construction methods. So we'll share all that at the end. Basically, I'm hoping that if you're new to this is very much of interest and you learn something. Do you know what? You might also have been into these things for God knows 50 years, but you might hear some of these different string materials and go, do you know what? I think that's new and interesting. I'd like to try that. And it's also of use to you. So really, I'm producing this video completely out of personal interest, and it occurred to me that I could just film the process and share the results. Basically, about maybe a year or less ago, a very dearly lovely person sent me a whole load of old national catalogues and some old national string packets, and it led me on a discovery. When I opened up these 1920s national string packets, I noticed that the strings were kind of a silvery colour, and not the usual brassy colour that you think of with the more modern phosphor bronze type strings. And you ask around and what you find out is that basically until probably the 1950s or 60s, people used nickel steel strings and not these brassier phosphor bronze strings. And what I was interested in trying out was what a nickel string sounds like on a resonator. Does it sound more vintage, more like the old recordings? I thought I'd like to try and just figure it out for myself. I put nickel strings on my rusty Duolian because of the electric pickup, and it's a much more even output. And I love the sound of this. It's definitely changed the sound a lot, but I do like the sound of this guitar unplugged. So I guess the fairest way of testing is just to put brand new fresh strings on, back to back on the same guitar, record it, share it. You know, it's not scientific, but this is the only way I could figure out to really get an idea of which strings I think sound the best. So it's about 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. This is going to take me hours. If I'm honest, I'm not looking forward to it. I'll get a good podcast or documentary on while I'm doing this. But yeah, so look, I'm in my house on the 3rd floor in the music room. I've brought up a flask of coffee and some Scottish-made Tunnocks caramel biscuits. And yeah, I don't want to have to leave. I just want to get this done. So here we go. Okay then, so here I am at my desk. And yeah, basically, we don't need to show the restringing, do we? I think we all sort of understand that. I will probably produce a separate video out of this anyway. You'll be able to find it if I do make that. Okay then, I've got the first set of strings on. So a few little notes, just so you know what's going on. I'm going to switch to recording through this very nice little Focusrite stereo speaker. That's a very nice little kind of product for recording through a mobile phone. You get a really nice sensitivity with that. If you do want to hear the subtle differences, you want to probably use earphones or a proper speaker system. Your phone probably won't share the kind of differences as well. What I'm going to do is cover up as I play, and I'll tell you it's strings A, B, C or D. Then what I'll do is, at the end, I'll share with you which string type is which. Then at the end we'll discuss the differences and which ones were vintage and which ones weren't. I'm going to use a thumb pick and bare fingers, so you should be able to hear, you know, a clarity in the bass from the plastic of the thumb pick, but also fingers on strings. So depending which style you play, you'll get a good idea of what these strings sound like. Okay, so here is string A. string set C. Okay, string set D. So there's the 4 kinds of strings. Can you hear a difference? Let's just do it again, but this time in bottleneck, and then we'll talk about it after. So there we go. I hope that helps consolidate the differences. So tell us, which ones do you think sound the best? Which ones do you like the sound difference? Can you even hear a sound difference? What I'll do while you're doing that is I'll give you a little message from our sponsors, and then we'll talk some generalities and we'll finish up. So here's the message from our sponsors. It's me. I'm sponsoring myself. Basically, look, little quick message. Just help me and Jack, help the channel as best you can. There's a great way, which is just to go to the description and join the mailing list. We'll send a few emails a year where we're playing, what gigs are coming out, what's going on. We'd love to share that with you. Other great ways, all our links are down there. But do subscribe. That really, really helps the channel. And you can press the like button, or there's a little game going between me and Casper. You can shoot the like button in the face with a bazooka, and really, that really helps. So there we go. You've probably had time now to decide which ones you like the sound of. First of all, let's reveal what the strings were. So string set A was the Newtone Phosphor Bronze. String set B was the nickel-plated Newtones. String set C was the Diodario coated Phosphor Bronze. And then string set D was the Monel Newtone strings. So I have been reading loads on the internet, and I kind of got confused with what these strings are meant to be and which kind of strings might have been on, old Nationals coming out of the factory. So I decided to literally just buy them, just so I could hear for myself. The first thing is, you know what? The differences aren't as big as I thought they would be, but there are differences. I hope you heard them. The basic idea is meant to be that Monel and the nickel steel are what strings were really until the probably late 50s, early 1960s, and then acoustic instruments went towards a phosphor bronze string. I think the idea is meant to be that the phosphor bronze, the nature of those alloys, is that they're a little bit zingier and they're meant to be a little bit more clear in the sort of upper mid frequencies. So you kind of think about a kind of nickel string or a Monel string as being a bit more vintage sounding, but what I was reading people saying was that the Monel strings, which stopped being made really probably through the 80s and 90s and 2000s, like I think almost nobody made Monel strings. But the idea is meant to be that the Monel has a certain kind of sound that's quite clear and strident. So my experience there was, the phosphor bronzes are quite zingy, quite clear, quite beefy and bigger generally. There's more zinginess and then there's more kind of body to the sound. The nickel was actually quite articulate, quite nice in the top end. Definitely rounder and warmer. Definitely. The Monels were, yeah, kind of clear. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the Monels on that guitar, which is why I did them last, basically. A lot of people online say, oh, you put the Monels on, they're a bit too bright. Then what you do is you know, after a little bit of playing, they kind of come to life more. They kind of settle, but they kind of get bigger. So I'm going to keep them on for a week and see. I might even do a video. What was kind of surprising was the difference, say, between the Newtone Phosphor Bronze and the Diodario Phosphor Bronze. I think the Newtones have a lot of, in the room, certainly a lot more kind of three-dimensionalness. The Diodario ones maybe kind of lacked the kind of three-dimensionalness, but they were quite a strong sounding string. So from what you've just heard and that kind of idea of what these strings are meant to represent, it might give you an idea. If you've got an old National, you might think, you know what, flip it, I'm going to try a set of nickels and go back to like factory spec, and that might be the thing. And you know, it's a great sound. Let's now talk about some generalities and help people with some other ideas around this very nerdy string test that I've just done. So first of all, let's just talk about string gauges. For me, I have discovered from, you know, doing 200 gigs a year pre-COVID that I have two guitars that I gig with washboard resonators. I have the Stylo, which I have 13s on, and then I have the Tricone, which I have 16s on, and the Tricone does all the Bottleneck stuff, and that works really, really, really well for me. Now, a question you get asked often by people is if I'm doing Bottleneck or standard, I'm going between the both of them, what's the best way to kind of do that in terms of strings? Well, I like having a specific Bottleneck guitar with 16s, especially a Tricone. Tricones lack bass when compared to a single cone. The 16s have a 59 gauge string on the bottom, as opposed to a 56 that, say, a 13 set does. And what I find is when I put 16s on for the first time with that 59 on the bottom, the Tricone got beefier. And so I'm happy with that. That's a bigger sounding instrument now. But yes, if people are wondering about strings, basically what you'll find is that 13, I personally think with a well set up guitar, you can put 13s on. You can do Bottleneck, you can do normal standard playing. That's perfectly fine. I know of people that put 11s and 12s on resonators. I think that you start to lose some of the tone. You don't drive the resonator as much, the actual cone. If you're plugging in, I don't think it matters too much. If your hands need that, you know, low action and thinner strings, that's fine. I think persevere. If really you want to be thinking 13s and driving the instrument, and that's great. And that is what, you know, roughly what came out of the factory back in the day, roughly 13 gauge. Now, if you want another little kind of hint and tip, look at the string gauges and look how a set of 13s and a set of 15s are exactly the same, except the 15 on the top. Basically, I think a set of 15s actually is an even better sort of do-all set, because the difference between a 13 and a 15 isn't too bad on a standard tune guitar. Usually on resonators you're not doing much bending, fretted. So you can do all the normal fingerstyle stuff. But when you do go to an open Bottleneck tuning, that slightly thicker string, as it gets slackened off down to, say, like a D for open G, that extra string gauge does just help with the bottleneck. You get less rattles on the side of the neck. So do consider, if you want, you know, a set to do both 13s or 15s, which are basically the same set, they will do both really, really, really well. So another thing is like round core versus hexagonal cores. So basically, things like Diodarios are machine made. They have an hexagonal core, and that allows the string to be wound on very fast on a machine and get production out. And it does add a certain thing to the sound. I think that generally kind of adds a kind of zinginess. The general consensus is that hexagonal strings age faster, they dull quicker. I have the coated ones. Basically, on my gigging guitars, I have these because these coated Diodarios. Because basically, in normal times, I do 20-25 gigs a month. I don't want to be changing strings every week or every 2 weeks. It's just too much of too much time. So the coated means I usually get away 4, 5, 6 weeks between string changes, and I still have enough top end in the acoustic guitar sound that's plugged into the PA that I'm not having to put too much treble on with a PA system. So that's why I like them. In an ideal world, if I had a Roadie or a Guitar Tech, then I'd have these things going on, and I'd probably keep them on every 2 or 3 gigs. The Newtones sound incredible. Now the Newtones are round cores, and what does that mean? That is how strings used to be made back in the olden days, the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And what it kind of means is that the tension is less, actually, than a hexagonal core. So you could say that a set of Newtone 13s probably feel like the equivalent of maybe a set of Diodario 12s, roughly. And as you go up, they kind of get better. It's also meant to be the case that the round cores, because there isn't the space between the windings and the hexagon that sweat and dirt can go in, they're meant to sort of stay brighter longer. My experience is that Newtones go on the guitar and automatically sound bedded in, and then they stay really good. But there is a point where they suddenly just dull very quickly and need changing. Whereas I find with the Diodarios, they go on quite bright, they stay bright. After a good few gigs, they start to feel a bit more subdued and bedded in, and then you keep enough, high-end content to keep going for longer with them. There are other strings, there are John Pearse makes sort of an equivalent of Newtone in America. They're fantastic strings. I don't have any to try, sadly, but I have had those in the past, and they are excellent strings for definite. So there's a few other things to watch out for. I mean, for quite a while I was using these because they were listed as resophonic guitar strings, Diodario, coated 16 gauges. So I was putting these on my tricone, but the low string was a bit wobbly and wasn't, it wasn't very, very fat sounding guitar sound. Then I read about these and I figured out that these are actually developed for when people play lap style Dobro in a particular tuning, what's called a high G bass tuning. So even though these say resophonic guitar on them, it's not quite right. If you're playing more like Bottleneck, Delta Blues or things like that, the low end on these strings isn't quite right. So any 13s with a 15 on the top, that's good. These Newtone strings are specialist resonator strings. They're Michael Messer signature set. There's nobody better in the world who knows about resonators than him, sells resonators, plays resonators at a very high level. So these things have been developed to be right. John Pearse does some very nice strings there, well worth thinking about. But yeah, I mean, basically, strings are a big part of a guitar sound, aren't they? And they're something you can change relatively affordably. Say £10 for a set of strings, $13. It's probably worth experimenting yourself, and maybe you might find something that really works for you and sounds different from everybody else. Basically, it's why I wanted to do this video, experiment. Pretty much everybody I know that plays resonators just puts Phosphor Bronze acoustic strings on. Well, there's these other ones you can try, and they are interesting, and they do have character. The nickels I have on this are very, especially now that they've even been played in more, are so warm, almost too warm acoustically, but it's a beautiful sound. So give it a try. Make sure your resonator's set up right. Make sure the action's good. Take it to a specialist luthier. But yeah, hopefully, this helps you with your resonator journey, move on and discover something and hear those strings, and I hope it helps. So thank you very much everybody, and bye-bye for now.